You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Our next guest is stopping in the middle of a statewide tour. It's Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So catching you in the middle of the final stretch here of the campaign season, how has the campaign trail been treating you?
Oh goodness, it's been fantastic to travel the state of Illinois. Right now I've just kicked off a women's economic empowerment and mobilization tour that's taking me all across the state to really lift up the voices of women in Illinois. I chair the Illinois Council on Women and Girls. Governor Pritzker and I are working very hard to try to make sure that Illinois is the best state in the nation for women and girls. And so we're meeting with groups of women to talk about things like gender pay equity, and to talk about women's reproductive freedoms, and to talk about just ways that we can ensure that more women are in leadership positions. And that's something that the governor and I both highly value. As you can see from our administration, there are so many strong women in these positions.
That will be a perfect segue into a question I have down the road, but first I want to get into this poll that came out earlier this week. Nexstar, WCIA, Emerson College Poll coming out showing that your campaign having a 15-point lead over Darren Bailey's campaign among many other more deeper polling results. Just overall, your opinions on this poll. Is this good news for your campaign at this point?
Well, I think the news that comes out of that poll is that Illinoisans see the leadership that J.B. Pritzker has brought to our state and what our administration has done to lift up working families all across our state. And whether it's raising the minimum wage and giving more people a livable wage, lifting 1 million people out of poverty, whether it's making sure that we enshrine reproductive freedom into our state law, and certainly the work that we have done to bring our state to some fiscal stability. 4 balanced budgets that have been passed, 2 with the surplus, 6 credit rating upgrades. These are things that are resonating with voters all across Illinois. And we still have 40 plus days away till Election Day, but it certainly is a good indication that people are hearing our message of what we want to continue doing to continue to keep Illinois on the right track. One of
the most glaring numbers for me in this poll was the difference in support by gender for your campaign. Pritzker only holding a 2% lead among men, but a 25% lead among women out of all of the women polled for this. And do you believe that is, in part due to the tour you're on now and this kind of staying on message with that, or is this, largely a part of the reproductive rights messaging that the campaign has been hitting so hard on this on the campaign trail?
Well, I think there's a number of factors. I think first of all, women in the state of Illinois have seen the progress that we have made to lift up women in our state, whether that's expanding access to child care, an issue that disproportionately impacts women, whether it's making sure that there is equal pay and really working to make sure that these certificates are filed by corporations to tell us, are you paying the employees equally? That's an issue that impacts women. Getting rid of the salary, having to tell your salary history when you're applying for a job, that disproportionately impacts women. But I can't underestimate the impact of the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade by a far-right Supreme Court that clearly believes that women should not have bodily autonomy in the decision to decide what's best for our own bodies. I'm a mom. I'm a mom of 4 daughters, and I had to have a conversation with my 3 adult daughters about how could it possibly be that they could not be trusted to decide what's best. And what we always say is that, the decision if and when to have a child or to start a family should solely be in the hands of a woman, and recognizing that, this is not a decision that should be made by government. And I think that we are seeing women across our state who are motivated by this issue, who want Illinois to remain a beacon of hope. And clearly, on the other side of this ticket, on the other side of the ballot, we have Darren Bailey, who does not support a woman's right to choose, even in cases of rape or incest. And that is something that women of Illinois just quite frankly aren't going to stand for.
Since the Dobbs decision, Illinois has been a haven state for abortion access. And you said you wanted to remain that way. But if you return to veto session as lieutenant governor again and then go into the next session, what can Illinois do more in this regard? What are there any policies that are front of mind for you that would expand access in the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm hearing many of the stories of women while I'm on this women's economic empowerment tour who are making the case that it's an issue of health care. I mean, reproductive health care, and to continue to make sure that Illinois remains a beacon of hope so that women who unfortunately don't have that access, not just in neighboring states, by the way, but they're coming from states like Texas and from Tennessee and other states, because they know that this is something that we value here. We want to make sure that access to reproductive health care remains available and that women have the freedom to have that care. But I think it's also an economic issue, and that's what we're hearing stories about on this tour, that women who have shared stories about, had I made a different decision or did not have the ability to make a choice about what was best for me and my future, it would have had an economic impact. So I think that, in terms of a session and what's coming up, there's working groups who are talking about that. Certainly the governor and I are having conversations with healthcare providers and women all across the state to hear what they need and what would be most important to make sure that access to this type of healthcare can continue and be available for women in Illinois, but also that we remain, as I've said, a beacon of hope for women all across this country who are looking for places like Illinois where they can receive the care.
In this poll, one of the few places where Darren Bailey does hold a slight lead is in the economy issue. There are 35% of voters say the economy is the forefront issue for them, and in that issue, Darren Bailey holds a small lead, with people saying they would vote for him. With a little over a month now until Election Day, what can you point to over the last 4 years, and what can you point to for the future that you think would sway voters on that topic? What can Governor Pritzker round 2 get done to change those minds?
Well, I want to re-emphasize something that I said earlier, which is how important it is to have our state on a good fiscal path and to be fiscally stable. I was a legislator before becoming lieutenant governor. I was a legislator in the previous administration under the Rauner administration when we went almost 2 years without a budget. And we saw the devastation that it caused in communities all across our state. But under Governor Pritzker's leadership and working with our partners in the General Assembly, we've had, as I said, 4 balanced budgets. We've had 2 with surpluses. We've paid down the bill backlog. We are making sure that we have a rainy day fund. All of those are things that are going to help us to not just help our state continue on a strong path, but it's going to help everyday Illinoisans. It's going to help families and communities because we'll be able to better serve the needs of our constituents. I would also say that if you look at the $1.8 billion in tax relief that we've provided, look, we know that it's been a tough time with global inflation. And so thanks to the sound fiscal footing that we've put our state on in this administration, we've been able to give back to taxpayers in direct payments, tax rebates, so that we can help with putting food on the table for groceries or filling up your gas tank or even property tax relief. These are all tangible things that voters can look to, Illinoisans can look to say, this is what happens when you make good decisions and make sure that you pass balanced budgets. There's some money to make sure that the relief that so many Illinoisans need, they're getting in their pockets, and those payments are being distributed even as we speak.
Those are tangible things, but they're also temporary, and that's tough to measure up when you have an opponent on the other side of the aisle promising permanent tax relief and promising cutting state spending, cutting down the budget with a zero-based budget proposal. How do you match those up, I guess?
Well, I think the way that I match it up and a way that I think many voters will match it up is by looking at what Darren Bailey has actually done. I mean, he hasn't voted for any of this type of relief for families. He hasn't voted to make sure that we get a budget passed. I mean, he has been against everything that we have been focused on to try to continue to lift our state up. So this is not an example where we see Darren Bailey, who makes quote unquote promises. It's not about promises, it's about delivering on what you say you're going to do, and that's what J.B. Pritzker and our administration have done for the last 3.5 years, and we hope to continue to do that work.
You've rolled out the focus, you've explained the focus of your statewide tour that you're on currently, advancing all of these opportunities for women in the state. You've also been a big proponent of reducing the population of women's prisons in the state, but I wonder, if you are elected to a second term, what are those top of mind items for you? What is the top of Lieutenant Governor Stratton's agenda for a second term?
Oh, goodness. Well, there's been so many things that I've been honored to be able to work on. One is the governor created via executive order what's called the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative early on in our administration. And I'm able to chair the Restore, Reinvest, and Renew Board, which takes 25% of adult use cannabis revenues, tax revenues rather, to reinvest in communities that have been most harmed by the war on drugs. We've already, working with community stakeholders and legislators on our board, been able to put over $100 million into communities to address things like violence prevention, economic development, civil legal aid, youth development, and reentry services. So work is going to continue, and we want to make sure that we expand it to continue to include more community-based organizations to really help us understand what they need. As chair of the Illinois Council on Women and Girls, I mean, certainly as we work to lift up Illinois women, we're going to have to continue to provide leadership on the issue of reproductive freedom and make sure that women, as we think about how, with this influx of women coming to Illinois, how we can best meet the needs of healthcare providers and make sure people are not getting criminalized for providing healthcare. So that's going to be top of mind. And then I think as our administration as a whole, one of the things that's really important to the governor and to me is expanding access to education. I did a statewide tour where I visited all of our public universities and our colleges of education to address what we can do to build a more diverse teacher pipeline. I chair the Governor's Rural Affairs Council, so this is an issue in urban areas, but it's also an issue in our rural communities to make sure that we have young people who are interested in becoming teachers and a diverse group of young people who are interested in becoming teachers. So it's really something that I think, how do we make sure that college is more affordable? We've done so much to increase MAP grants, where right now, with the additional funding into MAP grants, every student in Illinois who is eligible will get a MAP grant. That is a great accomplishment, but we want to make any student who is, kind of at a certain income level to be able to go to college if they want to for free. And if you meet a certain threshold, we want you to have that opportunity. So that's something that we'll be working on in the next 4 years, hopefully.
Lawmakers won't be returning to this building until after the election for veto session in November. For a while there were rumblings that we could see a special session, whether it focused on reproductive rights or on gun control after the situation in Highland Park. Over the summer, we've heard a lot from the governor and from yourself about where the administration stands on gun control, for that matter. Despite not seeing any hard legislation, filed or a special session called, are things like assault weapons bans and discussions around gun control still on the table here going into veto session and going into the next session?
Well, those discussions are certainly still on the table. I mean, you mentioned Highland Park, but I also think about communities on the south and west sides of Chicago. I think about Peoria, and I think about East St. Louis and Rockford, and communities all across our state, which through this pandemic, we have seen nationally an increase in gun violence, unfortunately. And what the governor and I have said very clearly is that we need to ban assault weapons. We want to see that happen in this state. We want to see, we don't think people need high capacity magazines where they can just fire off all of these rounds in a matter of seconds, which has caused so much harm. So this is something that is still on the table. There are working groups in the General Assembly that are continuing to have these conversations. And just like anything, we want to make sure that we're hearing from the voices of all of the relevant stakeholders to make sure the best piece of legislation could be put forth. So that work continues, and we certainly remain committed to lifting up public safety and ensuring that everyone in Illinois can continue to be safe.
All right, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.